Welcome, listeners, to the Wild Wild West End, a podcast about Galveston County naturalism and wildlife. This is episode 8, The Rails of Galveston County, part 2, Other Railidae Genre. So, in this episode, I am going to cover in some detail the other 6 genre of rails that occur in Galveston County. Now, each one of these genre has one species that occurs in Galveston County. So, there's not going to be a lot about each genre, but I will, briefly mention, how many other species actually belong to the genus so that you can either, know that it's a large genus that, you could really look into more and find out more about the other rails, or that it's a very small genus that only has, maybe, I think one of the genus we're going to talk about, Porzana, I think it only has 3 species in the genus that are still living. So this cover photo is one of the birds that we're going to talk about. This wonderful photograph was supplied to me by my friend Jim Stevenson, who is a very talented photographer and an ornithologist. And anyway, so these different genre we're going to talk about are the more obscure birds. They're not the rallish rails, the archetypical rails that you think of when you hear, at least I think of when I hear the word rail. These are Some of these are very tiny birds, very cryptic, very rarely seen. They're going to hide in the tall grass most of the time. In the case of, some of the, I think 3 of these birds. A couple of them are going to be birds that are highly visible that you might see swimming around in ponds that don't have that shy nature that some of the other ones do. But they are all members of the same big family, Railidae. And I'm also going to review a really good book at the end of this episode. So everyone relax and listen to episode 8, The Rails of Galveston County, part 2, Other Railidae Genre. So the first bird that we are going to talk about is from genus Lateralis. It is Lateralis jamaicensis, the black rail, which is a coveted bird among birders. They are tough to find, tough to observe, and so right now I'm going to talk a little bit about how you might actually observe one, which is going to be 99% of the time by call. I have actually seen black rails on 2 occasions. Both time, my best look at one was for about 3 seconds, and then I shortly flushed one that flew through the air a short distance and disappeared into the grass again earlier this year. So they are not an easy bird to observe. You're gonna, as I said, most of the time you're gonna hear them call. And to make that happen, you need to be in the right place at the right time. Now, that right place that you need to be in is an area with damp soil, but not standing water. You can have standing water nearby, but you need to be in an area with, the birds are going to be in an area with outstanding water. There's going to be dense vegetation. You're going to need to usually probably be in a salt marsh or on the upland border of a salt marsh, which is, where I have seen both of the black rails I saw and where I have heard them calling in every instance that I have heard them calling. So, diagnostic things you're going to look for on this bird are obviously that red eye, but you're not going to see that bird for very long. So, you can really, really easily confuse a king rail chick or a clapper rail chick with a black rail. But one thing to note is that those birds are usually going to be in small groups, the chicks all being together with the adults nearby. That is not going to be the case with the black rail. Of course, they're going to have chicks with them at some point, but you're probably not going to see that, to be very honest. If you see a small bird that looks like it might be a clapper rail or a king rail chick on its own, take a real good hard look at that bird as quickly as you can and see if it has a red eye, if it has a rufous nape on its neck, and that characteristic white spotting there, from mid-body to rump. This is a tiny bird. This is a mouse-sized bird. So you're not looking for something that's the size of a pigeon or the size of a blackbird. You're looking for something that is very small. This is as described by the Sibley's Guide, a mouse-sized bird. Now, on to the calls. there's a really common call, the kicker call, that really is the giveaway. It's very distinct. It's hard to mistake for other rails unless you're someone that just doesn't really listen to bird calls or bird by ear. So I'm gonna play the recorded calls of the black rail that I have for you now. So there are actually two separate calls here that I have in Sibley's. One is for the Atlantic group and one is the Pacific group. Now you're most likely not going to hear the Pacific group of black rails calling here in Galveston County. You're going to hear the Atlantic group, which sounds like this. And just for reference, so you can hear the difference, I'm going to play the Pacific group call now. So you can hear the drastic difference in the cadence between those two different groups of rails. As I said, that first one is going to be the one that you're going to hear here in Galveston County. And they do have some other calls. One that is kind of called referred to as the growling, and they'll do the kick a cur call, and then they'll also do what's called a growl in there too. And I'm going to play that for you now. So as you can hear, quite a bit different than their, kick a cur call that they have. I actually I've never heard them do this. I mean, I've heard much shorter, quote unquote, growls from them, but never anything like that. But you can hear them do that. So just of note that, those are some different calls that you will hear from black rails. The Atlantic group, the Pacific group, and then the growling. So this time of year, this is May. We do have some augmentation or bolstering of the resident black rail population at this time of year during migration. So you are more likely to hear their calls at this time of year than any other time. When I was talking about habitat you might hear them in, I neglected to talk about the time of day that you're going to be more likely to hear them, and that is right at dawn and right at dusk. So those two times are going to be your hot zones for when you're going to want to be in the right areas to listen for these birds. But I have observed them to call at almost any time of day pretty randomly. Aside from early morning and late evening, also kind of mid-morning, 9:30, 10 a.m. I've also observed them calling pretty frequently on the Coastal Heritage Preserve where I work, if I'm in the right area. So places here in Galveston that you're going to be able to hear this bird call. Galveston State Park is a really great place to hear black rails call. You can hear them right around the first observation tower off Nature Trail Road. You can also hear them headed south out towards the freshwater ponds in the prairie out there where there's some marshy areas. Along Setagash Road, right where the bridge crosses the slough, just almost as soon as you turn on to Setagash Road, you'll see a bridge ahead. I have observed them calling there. And then because I have access to the preserve further west from the slough off into the mitigation land out there, we also have kind of an area where you hear these birds. 8 Mile Road, you can hear them at certain marshy spots along 8 Mile Road, or just as you turn onto Sportsman's Road off 8 Mile Road is another good place. Once you get past a couple of houses that are out there, it's another good place to hear them in the evenings. So this is a sensitive bird. When you list this bird on eBird, it's not going to broadcast a location. I don't think it's that big a deal. I mean, we are not hunting these birds for purposes of killing them. We are just trying to make a naturalist observation of, hopefully by sight, but more likely, as I said, by call. So those areas are going to be your kind of go-to spots here on the island in Galveston County, for that matter, unless you know some places on the Bolivar Peninsula for black rail, which I don't. Um, they've also been heard calling out in the marsh. I believe they refer to it as the North Marsh behind Moody Gardens, kind of near the tree farm area out there, but that's not an area that everyone has access to. But you could probably hear them calling from that parking lot back there. So good luck in finding, observing your black rail and getting that on your list. It's kind of a treat to hear them call, and it's even more special when you actually get to see one, which, not everyone ever does, but a lot of people I know have at least briefly seen a black rail. But if you're not really paying attention, it's really easy to miss one. So put your eyes on, put your ears on when you go out looking for black rails, and prepare to spend a little bit of time doing it. So we are going to move on to the next bird. So this is the Sora, sometimes referred to as the Sora crake or Sora rail. It's from genus Porzana, which again has one species that pops up in Galveston County. It is Porzana carolina. So the name Sora, we're not quite sure where that name came from anymore. Probably from the Native American word for this bird. So these guys are going to be a little bit smaller than Virginia rails. It's described by Cornell as a robin-sized bird. Males and females are going to look alike. The juveniles are going to lack that black masking on the face. So what I have for you here is a really excellent photo of a Sora that I took. And the secret to my success with this photo was I actually caught this bird in the Target parking lot here in Galveston. And it had just migrated in, I suspect, and landed in that parking lot, which was flooded overnight, thinking it was a wetland. And morning came, there's cars everywhere. This bird's tired. It's not a strong flyer to begin with. And, it was really confused and afraid. And I caught this bird and relocated it to a pond on the Coastal Heritage Preserve. And it was just flat exhausted. And it just stood around there and let me take some really nice close-up photos of it, which is a rare thing with a Sora. Like other small rails, they are very secretive birds. They are going to generally stay inside dense vegetation, but they're not as shy as black rails or yellow rails per se. So they'll sometimes walk out into the open, and their feet are very well adapted for them to walk on mats of vegetation in shallow water. So you'll see them doing that sometimes. They migrate into this area. We have a rare Sora or two winter over here on the upper Texas coast, but they're not a common bird in, say, December, but I have seen one in December. I've also heard one doing its whinny call in the marsh near 8 Mile Road as late into the summer as August. So that was actually a really good record of one. Unfortunately, I did not record that call. It was kind of an incidental observation. I just happened to be in the area, was actually sitting there listening to bullfrogs call, and just out of the blue comes a Sora whinny. So these birds actually make a number of different calls, which I'll play for you in a minute. First, I wanted to say, so I mentioned that it was sometimes referred to as the Sora crake. I wanted to talk a little bit about that whole crake or rail thing. Black rails in some places are also referred to as the black crake. So I had a question about that. I was wondering, are these different species of rails, or what's going on with this naming? So I talked to my friend Jim, who's an ornithologist, about it. He let me know that crake is not technically a correct term when you're speaking about North American rails, but that the term is interchangeable primarily in Hispanic-speaking countries, where they will refer to short-billed rails and sometimes other rails as crakes. So it's not technically an incorrect thing to call them, but I prefer Sora rail or simply Sora. Actually, just call them Soras. But lots of people I know refer to them as the Sora rail, and of course they are a rail, so that's perfectly acceptable. Um, as I mentioned, these guys that migrate in here, they are here now. Now being May 1st, it's May 3rd today. No, it's May 4th. May the 4th be with you. So Soras are here now. They've been here for a little while. I think they start to arrive, at least the ones that are going to migrate into this area or through this area, in early or late March. So you could go out now and find yourself a Sora. Good places to do this are the Oppenheimer Observatory on the Artispoke Coastal Heritage Preserve. Um, Other places on the preserve where there's not public access are also, fantastic places to see a Sora. Lafitte's Cove Nature Preserve is also a really good place to see a Sora, but you got to be patient to do it and be in the right place at the right time. Kind of focus on those breaks in the vegetation where you can see, and just be patient. And much like the black rail, you're far more likely to hear a Sora call than you are to see one. But to be clear, you're going to see one more often than you would see per se, say a black rail. They're not nearly as shy. Generally, when I see them, it's from a distance on the edge of tall vegetation at the water line in a freshwater habitat, although you can see them also in brackish water habitats as well. I've had the best luck with really fresh water on these birds. So I'm going to go ahead and play their calls for you now. So they have a couple of different whinny calls. Here's the first. So here is another. So that was the first of three what are referred to as the Curwee calls. Here's the next. And here's the third. And here are just some other general calls. So as you can hear, these are vocal little birds like a lot of rails. I guess that's useful for them since maybe they have as much trouble finding each other as we do finding them in the habitats that they live in. So they need that calling mechanism to locate each other. So anyway, that wraps up the Sora. Good luck finding yourself a Sora. I actually got my lifer Sora, funnily enough, with Romy Swanson in Big Bend National Park and Rio Grande Village. So that was kind of an odd place to get your lifer Sora when you were from Galveston, but that's where it happened for me. And then after that, I started, after I knew their call, I started finding them out here pretty regular. And then the longer you bird, the more observant you get to small details and habitats. And I can find them pretty much, it's not an everyday bird, maybe not an every week bird, but, during the right time of year, I'll find a Sora. So we're going to move on now to the next bird. Okay, so I kind of went on and on about how difficult it was to find black rails. Well, finding black rails is easy compared to finding yellow rails, or at least to me it has been, because I have actually found black rails and I have yet to find a yellow rail anywhere, much less in Galveston County. I know a couple of people that have. My friend Mark Lear has actually photographed a yellow rail in, I think, San Bernard National Wildlife Refuge, which is not in Galveston County. And My friend Bob Becker took this wonderful photo of a black rail, also not in Galveston County. So I have yet to see a photo of a yellow rail in Galveston County. They do migrate here, so they absolutely can be found in the county. There are records of them in the county. I just don't have any, and neither does anyone else I know. So places to look for them. So this is a very small bird, comparable to the black rail in size. I think they're a little bit larger, but not enough to be discernible. They are also described as a mouse-sized bird. Their calls are really, really subtle. They sound a lot like calling frogs, or many people would mistake them for an insect. At least, two of the three recordings I have. One of them is an obvious bird call called the squeal call, which still, if I were to hear that call while I was just walking out in a marsh, yellow rail wouldn't be the thing that jumped out of my mind. But, maybe since I'm really looking for one, I need to start paying extra attention to those calls. So where to find a yellow rail, excuse me. I've read various things. One says that you want to look in areas with water that's less than a foot deep. For such a small bird, I would imagine that you would want it more shallow than that, but hey, less than a foot is all I have to go by. Rice fields are said to be a good place to find them. So maybe, especially with any kind of vehicle, combine, tractor traffic in a rice field at the right time might put enough pressure on one of these birds to fly during the day, which they very, very rarely do. There have to be extreme pressure to get them in the air during the day to be visible. A grass fire might be one thing that could do that. If you ever know of a grass fire going on in the right habitat, I would recommend going out there and seeing if you could catch one in flight. They rely on large, thick stands of Spartina grass, so that is another indicator of where you might find them. For all that any of that is worth, coming from me, who has never found a yellow rail. So I'm working on it. They are my holy grail rail for Galveston County, the only species of rail that occurs in Galveston County that I have not seen. So I know I'm not the only one looking. Good luck to everyone else that's looking. I am gonna play some calls for you in just a second here. So the genus that these birds come from is Coternicops. There are only 3 living species of rail that belong to that genus, so it's one of the small ones I mentioned. And the yellow rail is Coternicops novaboreensis. So I am going to play some of their calls for you now, and remember what I said about it being subtle calls. These first 2 I'm going to play really, really easily could be mistaken for frogs. So that was, I believe, a single individual calling, and this is going to be multiple yellow rails calling. And this is the squeal call, the only one of their calls that actually sounds like a bird. So there we have it. That is my brief synopsis of what is probably one of the hardest birds to find in Galveston County. Wish me luck, and I'm wishing you luck. So this is the American purple gallinule. It is from genus Porphyrio, which there are 7 species in that genus, but only the purple gallinule ever occurs in Galveston County, migrates into here. This is Porphyrio martinicus, the American purple gallinule. So this photo is from my friend Bob, and I picked this photo because it shows the purple gallinule doing what purple gallinules like to do, walking on broadleafed aquatic vegetation. They really like lily pads and similar flora to walk around on top of and feed. You're going to commonly find these guys in freshwater or low salinity brackish water habitat. That's what they like. They like lily pad covered ponds and ponds with lots of floating broadleaf vegetation. You're gonna usually see them. They're a very shy bird. They are not gonna stay out in the open very long if there are people around. Your best shot is really early in the morning, being the first person on that pond, being really quiet and really hidden, and just watching those vegetation breaks at the edge of the water where the lily pads meet the bank, or sometimes even where there is no floating vegetation, just at the edge of the tall reeds and other vegetation around freshwater or low salinity brackish water ponds. So you're actually commonly confused with the with the common gallinule, but they're really easy to tell apart once you've seen them enough. For one thing, the common gallinule, which we're going to talk about in a moment here, is it's much more likely to be seen swimming, like in a duck-like fashion, swimming in the water. The purple gallinule is going to be, creeping around the edge of the pond on lily pads or other vegetation, walking with those big feet that are really well adapted for doing what they do when they do that. You're also going to want to look for that, of course, that their namesake, that purple coloration on their head and breast, that white rump, and those kind of greenish wings, and of course those big long yellow legs with those giant feet. That yellow-tipped red bill and that kind of white shield right there on the front of the face are all good indicators. The juveniles are not similarly marked and don't really get their markings into the probably for about a year of their life. So this bird has a number of calls that I'll play for you in just a moment here. Even though they are a gallinule and they look similar to the common gallinule, as I mentioned, this is the only species from genus Porphyrio in Galveston County, so they do not share a genus with the common gallinule, but they do share, they are both members of Railidae. So I'm going to play those calls for you now. So this is what is referred to as their typical calls. Which that actually sounds a bit like a chicken, and the movement of this bird is also going to be a bit like a chicken. This bird, by the way, is referred to by Cornell as a crow-sized bird. So here is the what's referred to as the kick call. So you'll want to familiarize yourself with those calls, but typically this is not a bird gotten by call the way some of these other rails are. Even though they're a very shy bird, they're not going to be shy as, say, a yellow or a black rail, and you do have a good shot at seeing one of these if you're quiet and early or late. The evening is a good time to see them as well. Another good tactic is to really keep your distance and watch that vegetation line at the edge of the fresh water from a good distance with a good pair of binoculars or a scope. So that is the American purple gallinule, and we're going to move on to the next bird. This is the common gallinule, an uncommonly beautiful bird to carry the name common. It is Gallinula galliata. I would like to tell you how many birds are in genus Gallinula, but that is a topic of some debate. There was a bit of a taxonomic split in 2011, and then the lesser moorhen was split off and into its own genus. There are quite a few. They're commonly referred to as moorhens. But anyway, this is properly the common gallinule, Gallinula galliata. So they're another bird similar to the American purple gallinule that you're going to find primarily in a freshwater habitat. You're going to find them in freshwater ponds or low salinity brackish water ponds with lots of floating vegetation. you're gonna know one of the differences, as I mentioned before, is you're gonna see these birds swimming, in a similar fashion to ducks most of the time when you see them. You will see those obvious long rail legs when they're out of the water, poking around on the bank or sitting up on logs. But generally, you're going to see them swimming around. This is not a shy bird like many of the other Railidae species are. This is actually a bird that will swim around right in front of you at not too much of a distance. Yeah, they keep their distance a little bit, but um, along with the American coot, they are probably the most visible of the rails in Galveston County. So you will have a very easy time seeing them. You can see them here at almost any time of year, but there seem to be, their presence is augmented in the spring. Um, they have a number of calls that are similar to the coot and the sora in some respects. I'm going to go ahead and play those calls for you now. And there are quite a few of them, so we're going to go through their two display calls first. Okay, and here's the next display call. So this is what's referred to as the cuck call. So there are two calls that are referred to as the keek calls. Here's the first. Here is the second. And lastly, this one is referred to as the whale call. So as you've heard, quite a vocal bird, like many other rails. As I said, I kind of speculate that that's the product of the habitat that they live in, is that they can have as much trouble finding each other as we have finding them. So as I said, easy bird to find in the county. Pretty much any freshwater pond, you've got a good shot at seeing a common gallinule. And this time of year they're plentiful, and there are birds that winter over in the area, specifically at the Oppenheimer Observatory here in Galveston. They're easy to see, even at any time of year you can possibly see one there. So we're going to move on to the next and final bird. So this is the American coot. It is from genus Felica, and there are actually 10 species in that genus, but this is going to be the only one you'll find in Galveston County. Note that red eye and that stubby white bill. This is a very duck-like bird, for a rail. It is commonly seen in large flocks. When I say large, I mean go over to Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge. You could see a flock of hundreds or even 1,000 of these over there in the springtime. Some of them winter over there at Anahuac. Some of them winter here in Galveston County, if you can find them. And then there definitely are quite a number that winter over at San Bernard. This time of year, though, the spring is the best time to see these birds. They're going to arrive in the winter, late winter, early spring, in massive numbers. They're a diving bird. They swim, the common gallinule is as well. I don't think I mentioned that. That they swim around like ducks, and these guys are diving, looking for aquatic vegetation to eat. Very distinct bird. I mean, it's black, has a red eye, stubby white bill, and you're going to typically see, not one by itself, but, groups of 5 to 100 of these birds. They have a number of calls I'm going to play for you in a minute. Just want to say this is the most visible rail-a-day species that you're going to see. These guys will swim around in large flocks right in front of you. Not difficult to find at all. They do like freshwater ponds, but you can see them swimming in straight out, salt water, high salinity brackish water. But their preference, if they're able to, if there are few enough of them that they're able to choose their habitat, you're typically going to find them in low salinity brackish water or freshwater ponds, with floating duckweed and a good supply of aquatic vegetation for them to eat. So I'm going to go ahead and play some of their calls for you. And by the way, there are quite a few calls. They're a vocal bird like gallinules. So here we go. Call one. Here we go with the next call. And one more time. Yet another call. Okay, and this is the last of the adult calls. And this is what the juvenile squeals sound like. Okay, so as I said, very vocal birds, roughly the size of a small duck. If you can't, you should be very easy to both see and hear American coots. So that is the last bird that I have. We have now, over the course of 2 episodes, we have covered every member of Rail-A-Day that you are likely to see in Galveston County, a couple that you're not likely to see. And that's about it. I'm going to move on now, and I have a book review that I'm going to do for you. And to keep it with the theme of Rail-A-Day, this book I'm going to review for you is the best book there is for them. So as the final segment in episode 8, I would like to do a review of an absolutely wonderful ornithological document. This book, Rails of the World, is top-notch. It is absolutely the Rail Bible. I have only had this book for a few days, and the more I look through this book, the more respect I have for S. Dillon Ripley, who compiled this amazing work on the rails of the world. The color plates in this book are fantastic. Some of them are to scale, others are not, but in either case, the attention to detail paid by the illustrator, J. Fenwick Lansdowne, is absolutely fantastic. On my first flip through of this book, so anyway, to backtrack just a little bit, this is not the kind of book you sit down and read like a novel. This is an ornithological reference book to every species of rail that was documented at the time of publication, which was 1977. Another cool thing about this particular copy that I bought this book for myself for my birthday, because that's the kind of thing you do when you start to get old, is you buy yourself birthday presents, because other people really aren't buying them for you as much as they used to. So I bought myself this book. I managed to get a good deal on it. In years past, I had tried to find a copy of this book, but they were not affordable to me at the time. I managed to get a really great deal on one on an eBay auction, and I am a proud owner of Rails of the World, one that is in pretty good condition, I might add. So this particular copy that I got for myself for my birthday was actually signed by the author the year I was born. Of course, it's dedicated to someone else, but however it happened, that book managed to get into the circulation again. I purchased that book. It's particularly special to me because it was signed by the author the year I was born, after its 1977 publication. So I was born in 1978, for anyone that wondered how old I might be. So another thing I really liked about this book was, in my initial flip through of the book, I was interested in the topic of hybridization between Rallus elegans and Rallus crepitans. So that's the king rail and the clapper rail, and the salinity levels for both those birds, and at the salinity levels that they might hybridize in. Some of the notes on that actually were sourced as coming from an untitled manuscript written by Henry Stevenson, which was, unfortunately, Henry passed away some years ago. But Henry Stevenson was a noted ornithologist. He is my friend Jim Stevenson's father. So in their own small way, both of the Stevenson ornithologists have contributed to this podcast. Henry has contributed to my general knowledge of rails, which I'm trying to pass on to an audience now. And Jim also contributed his black rail photos that you see as the cover photo and the first bird talked about in the podcast. So thank you, Jim Stevenson, and thanks to your late father, Henry, for allowing his notes to be used in such a wonderful book that I have learned so much from. So anyway, Rails of the World, if you are a collector of natural history documents, of ornithological works for reference, this is like a have-to-have book. That's pretty much all I have to say about it. Like I said, this is not the book that you read like a novel. This is a reference book. But I do find myself sitting down and reading it like a novel. I'm probably about halfway through it right now, and I have learned a great deal from it about not only, of course, American rails that are applicable to Galveston County. I mean, that's just a very, very, very small sampling of the rails of the world. So, give this book a shot if you can find an affordable copy of it. So here we are at the end, the wrap up of episode 8, The Rails of Galveston County, Part 2, Other Rallidae Genre. I've really enjoyed the entire process of recording the 2 episodes that make up this series of podcasts. Not only have I gotten to go through a lot of people I know's rail photos and find the best ones, at least for my purposes, but I have learned a tremendous amount. So just to say a little bit, I am not extremely knowledgeable about ornithology, which for any ornithologist that watches, listens to or watches my podcast is going to quickly realize. I undertake a lot of study for some of these episodes. The ones about certain snake species are relatively easy for me. I don't have a lot of rehearsal involved in that. But these that are about birds, they're not only educational for you, possibly, they're very educational for me. I teach myself a lot of what I know, and this entire process of learning to podcast and writing the scripts for these podcasts has really been educational for me, not just about making podcasts, but about some of the subject matter that I'm going over. Yes, I am, at a beginner's level of knowledge about rails, but a lot of the knowledge that I use to go into this podcast about, especially this episode 2, I've been very interested in Rallus rails for a number of years and have studied them. But as far as these other genre, I was relatively weak on my knowledge in them, and it has really been an experience to learn all of these things about these birds in a capacity in which I could pass that on through my podcast. Really enjoyed it. Hope everybody enjoyed learning about the other rail genre of the county. some you may not have known were even rails, such as the coot and the common gallinule and the purple gallinule. Lots of people just, I guess, don't look that deeply into the families or genre of birds that they watch or list. And I'd like to just give everybody that little push if I could. Just pick a bird that you're really into and go read some scientific documentation about that bird. I did that a lot to make this episode. I just wish everyone would further their knowledge of the animals that they love so much. I know some birders that they go out, they have a great time, they recreationally bird, and sure, that's fine if that's what you want out of it. But you might want more than that and not even know it yet. So I encourage anyone that's listening to go look into some other birds, learn about them yourself, read the text in your field guides. A lot of people just look at the photos in a field guide, and for identification purposes, they might read the notes on the field marks, just to try to figure out what kind of bird it is. But don't go much deeper than that into it. One of the primary ways that you're going to locate birds that you want to see, aside from, of course, somebody telling you, hey, I saw a purple gallinule at X, Y, or Z pond an hour ago, and you go over there and find it. Sure, that's how I see a lot of the birds I see. So I'm not knocking that communicative birding in any way. It's a fabulous thing, of the modern era. But somebody has to find that first bird that they pass on to everybody else. They either have to do that through random chance, being in the right place at the right time, or knowing the right place to be in to make that right time come. My grandfather was a birder and a naturalist, and he had a talent, at least I thought he had a talent, for being in the right place at the right time. I remember being 8, 9 years old, being at his place up in Rye, Texas, near the Big Thicket, and he told me, he would always find these animals and spot them and observe them, and they were animals that I would walk right past sometimes, and I asked him, how do you see so many animals? And he told me, if you're never in the right place, the right time never comes. You have to be in the right place when that time comes. So reading the text in the field guides will familiarize you with the types of habitats that you will find a particular species of bird in. Yes, you can find those birds outside of that habitat through random chance, during a migration, or just when that bird just happens to be out of place at the moment. But you can really drastically increase your chance of finding those particular species of birds, such as rails, by being in the habitat that they live in. So that's just some final notes on, what I've enjoyed about this process and kind of what I wish more people would do. So, take that for what it's worth. One man's opinion is that people could always stand to be more educated about the animals they love. So, go out there and get yourself a little more education. Obviously, that's what you're doing now if you're listening to my podcast. So, thanks for listening. This has been the Wild Wild West End, a podcast about Galveston County naturalism and wildlife.